Every single time he drops an album, the discussion around DJ Khaled is the exact same. What does DJ Khaled even do? He doesn't rap, he doesn't sing, he doesn't write or even produce any of his music. Lots of people would just describe him as taking leftover verses from better artists and adding corny ad-libs on top. His beef with Tyler, the Creator, over Igor didn't exactly make him look good either. Back when he was screaming and yelling about how no one ever listens to Tyler in barbershops or in cars, I actually thought that was pretty funny because there is a guy in my neighborhood who has a slingshot and always plays songs off of Flower Boy when he rides around. But I gotta admit, I kind of like what Khaled does, at least as an idea. He knows how to curate a song, he knows what sounds good most of the time. And yeah, maybe he overhypes himself, but there are a bunch of tracks he's put out over the years that I still listen to once in a while. Nothing he really puts out is deep or meaningful or narrative, and he's a pretty corny character, but he knows how to bring together artists in a way that feels fun and catchy. He's a master of marketing, and he knows how to curate a song too. Plus, nothing he puts out is really bad, but it is true, a DJ Khaled album will never be as conceptual or complex as something made by an actual artist. But does that mean that a DJ Khaled album can't be fun to listen to? I think that's what's up for debate here. So let's talk about God Did.
Yeah.
First track, No Secret, featuring Drake. I don't really know what this is, to be honest. It's 45 seconds long as Drake spits some vague nonsense about being better than everybody on top of church organs and shimmery ambient sounds. And the whole time, I'm just imagining that one picture on Twitter of Drake's hands. He's wearing a diamond bracelet, and the caption says something like, Drake looks like he's never touched an inconvenience in his life. I don't know. I have nothing against this track, but it's 30 seconds long. What can I really say about it? I like the church organs, but it's kind of weird to hear Drake gloating and bragging on top of religious music. Back and forth on his turnpike. Really. The first proper song on God Did, titled God Did in all caps, is 8.5 minutes long, and it features 4 massive veterans of the music industry: Rick Ross, Jay-Z, Lil Wayne, and John Legend. Not only is this just blatantly a really expensive song and a massive flex, it's not a small thing to have Rick Ross, Wayne, Jay-Z, and Legend all together on one track. It's an A-list cast of superstar artists. Rick Ross's verse is pretty standard for what he's been doing the last few years, but Lil Wayne actually kills this section with some great lyrics like God did his thing when he made me, a classic reference to either poop or butts, something he's been doing for his whole career. I think he said, I'm a actin' ass and they're gonna have to kiss me. But Jay-Z's verse is absolutely insane. He's rapping for 4 minutes straight and just absolutely destroys it. No questions asked. This is one of his best verses of the last 15 years. He has lines like, Jesus turned water to wine, for Hove, all it took was a stove, and the overall feeling of hearing Jay-Z rapping his heart out in 2022 only reinforces how good he has always been and always will be. Even though he just recently said he's not working on an album at the moment, it's kind of incredible to hear him in such energetic form at a time when his career is on hold for the foreseeable future. Honestly, this is one of the best songs I've heard all year. Rick Ross, Lil Wayne, and especially Jay-Z, they don't sound like older, semi-retired rappers who peaked in the game 15 years ago. They sound like some of the greatest rappers to ever do it, which is what they are. And you don't get to hear them bring that type of energy and emotion very often anymore. This is by far one of the best songs any of these rappers has been on in the last 5 to 10 years. In my book, DJ Khaled gets a point for bringing that together and making it happen. A couple weeks back, Khaled predicted that Jay's verse on this track would be the verse of the decade. Honestly, he wasn't really lying. This is DJ Khaled's Off the Grid. And speaking of Kanye, track 3, Use This Gospel with Kanye and Eminem, is a remix of the 10th song from Jesus is King. Kanye's verse from the song is kept the same, while the production is handled by Dr. Dre and Timbaland, giving it a much heavier, bigger sound than the original track. If you remember, the mixing on Jesus is King was pretty terrible, and this remix actually sounds way cleaner with crunchy drums, sharp synths, arpeggiating electric guitar sounds. But despite all that variety and instrumentation, it ends up sounding mostly like a fan-made Kanye remix. It's pretty heavily overproduced, and even though Kanye's vocals sound cleaner than they did on the original track, it just doesn't feel as real as the original track did. It's so heavily overproduced that I don't find myself enjoying it that much. It sounds like commercial music or some kind of movie song. It doesn't sound like a real organic production. Eminem's verse on this track isn't bad. I'm not the biggest fan of him in general, but his verse is full of reflections on good and evil and all this and that. I think they used Kanye's original recording. The verse is kept the exact same and it sounds very similar. It does kind of feel like the first few tracks on this album give off a Donda Light vibe. They're long tracks, gospel-inspired production, big ensemble features, string sections, church organs, organs. The production is pretty overdone to the point of sounding overly commercialized and fake compared to the minimalism and rawness of Donda or Jesus is King. But I still think it's cool to hear this more poppy take on that sound.
Rainbow Audemars cause my bitch bisexual. We the best.
But the next track up, Big Time with Future and Lil Baby, was so underwhelming. Neither Future nor Baby sound interested at all in what they're rapping about. Baby especially just sounds bored, and he's almost not even enunciating his words in the way he normally would. You know, I've heard low effort verses from rappers before, but to hear Baby not even really sound like he cares about the rapping at all, it's unheard of. I can't see myself coming back to this track besides the pretty funny opening line from Future. Rainbow Audemars cause my bitch bisexual. Even the instrumental, which is supposed to sound all orchestral and epic, it doesn't go anywhere. It's just loud and fast. DJ Khaled. Track 5, Keep Going with Lil Durk, 21 Savage, and Roddy Ricch on the chorus has a similar effect. It's a pretty short song. Each artist only gets about 45 seconds to do their thing and doesn't really even sound like any of them knew the other was going to be on the song. It's disjointed, doesn't flow, it's way too packed with people just yelling. I can't see myself going back to this song either. It's loud, but there's nothing going on. Plus, again, these tracks feel overproduced. The beat is just chaotic, it has no variation, it's in your face the whole time, and Roddy Ricch's chorus on this track especially feels overly shouty. It's really not what I would expect from him after he carried Pure Souls on Donda last year. Not to compare everything to Donda, but Roddy Ricch had one of the best verses on that album, and on this one, he sounds kind of like garbage.
DJ Khaled. I like the wretchedest women. Go.
The track Party with Quavo and Takeoff starts off with an 80s hard rock sample, which almost always leads to an absolute banger. If you've ever heard Forta Gang with 42 Doug and Roddy Ricch, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. They're just super catchy in hip hop. Party is the same way. Quavo and Takeoff obviously have tons of chemistry, and this track also has a similar sound to the song Hotel Lobby that they just put out a few months ago, which I liked a lot as well. It's lighthearted, it's debaucherous, they've got some funny bars. It's a song for the boys, you know?
Staying alive, staying alive, staying alive. Another one.
But Staying Alive with Drake and Lil Baby is really similar to two songs Drake and Khaled already made 2 years ago, Popstar and Grease. It's got this kind of soft pop sound to it that makes it almost a ballad, with Drake more or less crooning. But the sad thing is Drake's performance on this track just doesn't really do anything for me. He sounds bored. It's an empty song. And Lil Baby sounds better on here than he did on Big Time earlier in the record, but overall, I can't see myself coming back to this. A Drake and Lil Baby collab when Wants and Needs is a song that exists. There's no comparison. There's no competition. This song isn't a banger. It isn't groovy. It isn't retro. It isn't funny. It isn't cute. It's limp. It's a boring, limp song. At this point in the album, I'm halfway through it, and at first I thought it was gonna be like DJ Khaled's corny, overproduced, self-centered version of Kanye's Donda, but there's one key ingredient he ended up forgetting about: the good performances. The part of Donda that made it good was how Kanye was able to bring everyone together and focus their lyrics and performances on uplifting emotional subjects. It felt like a group project with dozens of artists all coming together for one goal. And honestly, that's a lot like DJ Khaled albums are too, except DJ Khaled albums never end up being interesting as they could be because they're not planned or centered around any idea at all. It's just a bunch of throwaway verses mixed together with DJ Khaled yelling random shit on top. Obviously, God Did has a theme with the hip-hop gospel fusion in the production that ended up sounding way overproduced, but the lyrics and performances on these songs are anything but cohesive. Besides a few tracks, it feels completely uninspired and aimless. Most of these songs are completely forgettable. Listening through the rest of the album, the song with Future and SZA is like a boring version of last year's James Blake and SZA collaboration. It Ain't Safe with Nardo Wick and Kodak Black does feature one of my favorite verses from Kodak, as he does this sharp staccato rapping with a baby voice. And Nardo Wick is one of my favorite younger rappers who I think has a lot of potential, so it's good to see him on here. I don't usually love when these two artists are on a song together. I think they sound too much of the same and it doesn't really ever go anywhere. Plus, Travis Scott has been totally phoning it in with his songs the past few years, and this is just one of the worst verses I've heard him do. He doesn't say anything I can remember. His melodies aren't good. You know, he just gets in there, says some shit, and gets out. I mean, what are we listening to this for? It's a skip. It's an immediate skip. I'm sorry. These Streets Know My Name is a collab between a bunch of Jamaican artists. It mixes trap and dub sounds. I liked it a lot, but it kind of came out of nowhere. Juice WRLD Did features a posthumous verse from Juice WRLD that a lot of people immediately started calling one of Juice's best verses ever. And while I'm not really a huge fan of Juice anymore, I appreciate how happy and energetic he sounds on here, but it is still sad to hear him talking about lean and addiction in such a lighthearted way.
Everything me. Oh Lord, I'm grateful for anything and everything.
The record's final track, Grateful with Vori, it's an absolute nothing of a song. It's so overproduced, it feels like a sitcom outro. And at this point, Vori's just writing about the same thing over and over. You know, I had to make it through. I had no one with me. You know, now I'm here and whatever, man. I've heard this like 4 times. I have genuinely heard this song 4 times by now, at least. I like Vori's performances on songs. I think he has a beautiful voice and his subject matter is really good. You know, I think that he writes deep lyrics, but this song ended up feeling weak and limp because of all this album promised to be but wasn't. You know, it's so overproduced. The piano, it sounds like the outro to Reading Rainbow. And it just reminded me of how this album started so strong with the gospel overtones and killer verses, but it ended up being an album full of absolutely nothing. Listening to this album is like reading the first chapter in an amazing book, and then the other 9 chapters are blank. There's absolutely nothing there. It's made up of 75% throwaway verses. At the end of the day, a bad Drake verse is a bad Drake verse. It doesn't matter who he is. I keep asking myself while listening to this album, why would I listen to this song when I can listen to something that's actually good? All of the meaning, the religiousness, the piety, the preaching on these ad-libs ends up feeling completely fake. There is no storytelling behind it. It is just empty, selfish, prideful. It's boring. It's boring. Listening to this album makes me feel like I bought a Bible, took it home to read it, opened it up to the first page, and it was written with a crayon. But I'm gonna admit it, I was still hyped up for this album at the beginning because I think the idea of a DJ Khaled album is way better than how they actually end up sounding. Getting all of the best producers and artists in the industry together for one album with maximum hooks and choruses and viral songs, that sounds like a great idea. That sounds like it should be fun to listen to. But DJ Khaled, he's had his chance. This is the 5th album he's put out in 6 years. Does anyone even remember the names of his previous records, let alone what they sounded like? Do you remember what artists were on those albums? What were the singles from those records? Does anyone even listen to DJ Khaled albums the week after they come out? For all the marketing and aesthetics and production that goes into this, are there even 3 songs I would ever want to listen to again? More than anything, God Did by DJ Khaled reminds me of the fact that one day hip hop will go in the same direction as hard rock and heavy metal. There's already too much corporate money in the hip hop industry. It's getting way too commercial, and in the next 10 or 15 years, maybe less, maybe more, we're gonna get to a point where young people move on, and the huge amounts of corporate money that are bloating the hip hop industry with boring albums, corny promo, and stupid, annoying social media marketing, it's all gonna go away. Eventually, sooner or later, something else will come along and replace hip hop as the mainstream genre in music. Is it soul? Is it R&B? Is it gonna be rock again? I don't know. But a few years after that happens, someone will make a video essay talking about, you'll never believe this corporate compilation hip hop album that came out in the 2020s. It sounds like a boring version of all the hip hop sounds from the early 21st century. Look at this DJ Khaled guy. He used to make memes and do ad-libs on songs. All he did was buy leftover features and slap them together so he could act like he solved world hunger. And have you guys ever heard of 21 Savage? He used to be secretly British. This is the story of the worst hip-hop album of the 2020s, God Did by DJ Khaled. That's just what happens. Everything gets old. You know, we look back at things from the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. Oh, Michael Jackson, Shaquille O'Neal. You know, we look back at the new metal and the rap rock and the pop, and we look back at Jay-Z wearing, you know, baggy pants. Oh, look at that. We will all be irrelevant at some point in the future. It feels good to be topical and current and fresh, but you have to understand that absolutely nothing escapes the passage of time in our cultural landscape. Will people still remember me in 15 years? I don't know. Will people still remember Lil Durk in 15 years? I don't know. Will people remember Kodak Black in 15 years? I don't know. But I do know if people will still remember DJ Khaled in 15 years, because the answer is no, absolutely not. How do I know? Because I only listened to the album an hour ago and I already can't tell you a single thing about what I just heard. DJ Khaled's new album, God Did. There are 1, maybe 2 or 3 memorable songs on here. I appreciate that he tried, but we've been here before. We all knew how this was going to turn out. For me, it's a solid 2 out of 10. I'm Philip, and this has been Volksgeist. Don't forget to follow me on TikTok and Instagram, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.